Hi everyone, hope you're having a lovely summer. Welcome to the July webinar, which will be looking at personal statements, refining them and going through them. I'll just give everyone else a couple more minutes to join and then we'll get cracking. For those of you in the room or for those of you watching on Zoom as well, if you can let me know in the chat how you're getting along with the personal statement, how you're finding it so far, that would be fantastic as well. Yeah, so Vega says it's a little hard to write about myself for the personal statement. It's a weird one to have to write about yourself. We'll discuss this a little bit today, but certainly it's quite an unusual task compared to usually writing your essays at school, and we can think about some strategies for that. Any other thoughts on writing it so far? I'm keeping an eye on the YouTube comments as well. So if you want to write it on YouTube in the chat on how you're finding your personal statement and the writing process as well, feel free to put it there. I've got a short presentation for the start of today that I'll try and keep quite brief. And then it's really over to you guys to ask any questions or questions you have on writing it, the personal statements in general. And we'll use kind of quite a bit of the session to go through some of those points. Has anyone finished a first draft yet for their personal statement? Yes, but it wasn't very good. Okay, no worries about that, Sylvega. We can work on improving it. Olivia says you're nearly there. Last final push. Great. How about you? I can see Jafar, Emily, Dylan. How are you getting on with yours? Maybe not. We're still in holiday mode. That's okay. Let's get started. I will bring up some of the things I want to talk through today, and then we will get cracking on some. Jafar says, I've written a first draft, but need some work. Fantastic. That's what I'm here to help with on refining these first drafts. So I'll be working off a bit of a PowerPoint template for the first part, and then we'll go into thinking about these in some more detail individually based on your guys' comments. So to talk about my experience of the personal statement a little bit first, when I was preparing for university, writing my personal statement, it is quite a stressful period over the summer. So if you are feeling a little bit stressed right about it, my first piece of advice is please just pace yourself, take your time with it. You do have the whole summer to write this, and we will be giving advice along the way. We've already recommended a 6-paragraph structure to you for structuring that personal statement. I very much believe in it. It's the paragraph structure I used. It's the structure that we've used on the OMS for a number of years. All 4 of the last cohorts used exactly the same structure as well and had some success with it. My job also comes with the wonderful ability to be able to read all of your guys' finished personal statements, which we take a look at slightly later in the year as well. So we will be having a look through them. And some of the tips I'm sharing today are the product of reading through those personal statements from last year, as well as speaking to some of the admissions tutors on what they look for in personal statement writing. I can see RK saying as well, your personal statement, you feel like it still kind of requires a lot of editing and it's hard to write about yourself. Yeah, let's talk, we'll focus strongly on how to write about yourself in today's session. Before we do that though, I just want to have a recap of the 6-paragraph structure. If someone in the room is feeling bold and wants to unmute themselves, can anyone remind me of what 6-paragraph structure we advise here at Insight Outreach for the personal statement? What do we put in those 6 paragraphs? Anyone in the room who wants to feel bold? Okay, I'll guide us through it. Our first paragraph is a trigger paragraph. So that's an individual event that has captured your interest in the subject and shows where that passion really stems from. So that's paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 is then an academic paragraph to do with your achievements so far. That should start with your school subjects, your A-level choices, and then begin to go beyond that and think about things that you're exploring that have shown how you're different to other students studying that same combination of subjects. That's paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 is your favorite topics to do with the subject or course that you want to study at university. Paragraph 4 are subject-related extracurricular activities, things like work experience, lectures, online opportunities you've taken part in. Paragraph 5 is then pure extracurricular activities. It's a slightly shorter paragraph, but it's those things like the sport, music, drama, other activities, volunteering that you might be getting involved in. Then paragraph 6 is a summary paragraph that might also link or tie all of your ideas together. So that's the 6-paragraph structure I would really encourage and advise you to follow. It really is exactly the same structure that we use for every single personal statement. It gives lots of room for flexibility and creativity within it. And it just means that if you cover this, all of the main ideas, all of the things the admissions tutors are looking for in your personal statement will be there. As I'm sure you heard Claire, who was the former programs coordinator at Cambridge, talking about in last month's webinar as well. So 6-paragraph structure. Let's look at what we include that we can kind of take our content to the next level for based on the paragraph structures that I've outlined and you might have begun to have planned so far. If you don't know where to find that material, it's all online via the portals for self-study for mentees. So do look at that personal statement booklet on those portals for the best advice there. So first thing about taking that content to the next level, I think, is showing that your personal statement isn't frozen in time. What do I mean by that? Well, quite simply, when writing your personal statement, it can be easy just to think about all the stuff you've done quite a while ago, the stuff up until then, and then think of it as finished, done until you apply to university. I think some of the university personal statements that show a lot of flair talk about things that they're going to be doing over the summer or things in the future or things that they're still going to develop. It shows that form of intellectual curiosity. It shows that you're continuing to work and improve on that subject, even when you're finished writing your personal statement. So you're doing it purely because you love that subject rather than as a means to an end. Work experience. Who's mentioned work experience in their personal statement? Anyone? Has anyone got some work experience? Solvega has, fantastic. Anyone on YouTube as well? This is going to be a very interactive session, guys. I'm going to carry on asking you questions. So as we gradually get adjusted to that, do kind of write your thoughts and comments in the chat, because we're going to be going through working on your ones individually, basically. So Solvega, if I can ask you, where did you put your work experience in your personal statement? Feel free to unmute if you're happy to and speak to us about it. How did you structure it so far?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, so my structure's moved around quite a bit. I've done a few drafts, but I kind of put it in the paragraph where I was talking about kind of extracurriculars, because I linked it to the reading that I've been doing.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to put it, Solvega. So in our paragraph structure, it's about paragraph 4, as you say, to put in your extracurriculars there and to link it to the reading. It's really nice seeing those ideas kind of join together. So that's a really good one. Olivia, how about you? You said you've made some notes on work experience and are trying to put them into a sentence. Do you want to share with us how you're finding that?
I think it's going all right, because I've done work experience sort of around my subject area. So I've done it with engineering, but I'd like to go into architecture. So I'll probably talk about how I want to understand the scientific side of design, which will then help me to make realistic but still creative buildings. So I'll try. I mean, I can write in sentences quite easily, so it shouldn't be too difficult. But I just need to get on with it, I think.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, honestly. I think the amount of time I sat there kind of staring at the blank first sentence of my personal statement, thinking, where do I go with this, or how do I get this into words? It can be a little challenging, so don't worry about that too much. What I would say with the work experience, and it sounds like that a bit with you, Olivia, as well, is the experience itself is fantastic. It sounds really good and really focused. I would focus on what skills you learn from that work experience placement. It shows again that you're not going to just sit on what one person has told you in the information. You're always looking to learn, improve. So I'd focus in on maybe one specific area that was a new skill you learned from that work experience placement and develop it from there. I think especially with work experience, we can all fall into the trap a bit more of trying to describe and summarize all these great things we did. That's fine, but it's not so much what they're after for the personal statement. What they're really looking to do is what you've learned, what you've analyzed and reflected on, because they're the skills that will be most relevant for the university application. And that's how it differs slightly to a CV. So something to think about there with all of you who have got work experience. If we've got some medics watching, my last bit of advice would be, we've put work experience in paragraph 4. Medics quite often bump that up a bit higher because it's slightly more essential for that subject. So some people, if they have done a really cool work experience placement or they've done lots of work experience, might want to bump it up to a second paragraph. Again, that structure that we talked about with Joyce and Claire last time, it's advice, it's there to help. So it doesn't need to be completely rigidly fixed. These are the only 6 paragraphs you can include. It's just the best way to start it, to stem from, and then you begin kind of shaping and molding it slightly after you've planned those 6 paragraphs on how it best fits together. Now, last thing I want to talk about on this slide on taking the content to the next level is kind of the flow of the personal statement. And Dylan, I'm going to pick on you if that's okay. I've got kind of 2 different structures here of river and rock formation. Can you have any idea why on earth I've got these on this slide and how they might link to kind of the flow and structure of the personal statement? Any thoughts, Dylan? If you don't, that's fine. You can put, I've got absolutely no idea in the chat. Please don't pick on me, and that's okay as well. Fantastic. Yeah, Dylan's exactly right. So it's to do with static and flowing. And I think the first draft of the personal statement often looks a bit like something on this left, if I was kind of visually represent how it looks to me when I read them, which is there's really good solid structures, but they're really clearly defined of this paragraph, this paragraph, this paragraph. They're separate. It's kind of, it's a bit clunky to read through. That's absolutely fine for a first draft. But as we begin to think about how we edit, how we bring things together once you've got your first experience written, I want us to imagine it a bit more like that flow of a river where one idea links into the other, the paragraphs join together, and it's less obvious where that transition between one level starts and another level stops. We're going to break this down a lot more in terms of ways to do this, but it's that flow of ideas that really stands out a good first draft from a good final copy of the personal statement. So it might be if you finish one paragraph with one idea, you can find a linking word that introduces or moves on to a new part of that topic at the start of the new paragraph. So there's a flow between the paragraphs. Or it could be that if you've just finished talking about your physics work experience here, that inspires you to read this particular book, which then links into the book rather than just going, I did this work experience, I read this book. Try and link those ideas together. Even if it's a little bit forced, a little bit artificial, it's something that can really help. Let's look now at extracurricular activities, because these ones can be really difficult to write about when you're writing about them yourself. So we're talking more about paragraph 5, especially here. So I've tried to list some buzzwords here that might be helpful on the kind of things that different types of activities might show. 4 main categories. I've broken it down into sport, drama, music, volunteering. The difficulty of paragraph 5 is it can often really sound like a list of I've done this, 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 and this. And lists are really boring to read, if I'm being honest. And so it can be difficult to kind of avoid that and think how to work around it. So my first bit of advice is to put in these kind of skills that you could have learned from something. So if you're doing sport, think about the drive, the communication that that's given you. If you're thinking about music, maybe it's the time management skills. There are lots of different adjectives and buzzwords you could include here. But begin to think of that as a starting point to help you break that list structure. Then when you've got that, fantastic. The next stage is to show an exhibit rather than just tell me that these characteristics worked. So if we look at the example sentence here, playing football has developed my teamwork and time management skills. It's okay as a sentence, but it's the kind of sentence that I could read in anyone's personal statement. It doesn't tell me too much about you. It kind of seems quite generic and like we're trying to force those skills in. Really go and kind of show those skills rather than just using the buzzwords. So the buzzwords are the starting point, and then begin to develop and show them, to think how you can creatively link those personal statements together. I think in the last webinar, you were shown one of a student who had managed to link kind of fencing in national competitions to the idea of how he wanted to study PPE and the politics of that. Try and create some kind of unique twist with these ideas that just go beyond listing traits and the sports. That might take a little while to consider, but something to bear in mind as well if you're wanting to stand out and avoid that list-like structure. Are there any questions on that slide? I'm being quite generic, but if you have specific questions or you have a specific idea you want help with, do write it in the chat on YouTube, on Zoom, or feel free to speak to me and I can give you specific advice as well. Does anyone feel like their extracurricular paragraph is a bit list-like at the moment, or is this something you've kind of already solved and I should move on? What if you don't do many extracurricular activities? Great question. Jafar, I'm going to bring you in. What do you do, or kind of what, not sure of anything at all?
Hello.
Hey.
Well, at the moment, I'm not in any clubs, but I play football quite often. But I don't know, because I do quite a bit of sport, but I'm not currently in any clubs, so I'm not really sure.
Sure. I think so. This is a really good point, and actually one that goes right the way through the personal statement. It's not so much about what you do that matters too much. So it doesn't matter if you play football for a national team or whether you just kick it around with your mates occasionally in the back garden. The key is how you analyze and how you reflect on that in the personal statement. So just focusing on one or two activities in this paragraph is absolutely fine, as long as you have a bit more detail to substantiate them. So I would be looking at your interests within football, kind of why it appealed to you, whether you can see any relevance to your subject. So if, for example, you're looking at football and engineering, I might just have a quick Google on if I can find any kind of link between football and engineering, something that jumps out to me, a study that's been done, and begin to think about it in statistical terms, maybe. Something like that can be a nice way that you give a slightly different twist to this fifth paragraph. I'm talking just about a half sentence that it's added on to describe football and kind of how it's improved your appreciation of academics or something like that could be a great option here if you want to bulk out that paragraph a little bit more. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but do keep the questions coming. We're going to have a lot of questions today that I want to go through and answer from this. So this one, grammar, it's important. I love a dad joke. So yeah, there is the fact that the it is missing the apostrophe. So yeah, the slide itself isn't grammatically correct. And then even if you did have the apostrophe in there, it would be an abbreviation. So something that you probably want to use in the personal statement in the first place either. So it's just kind of watching things like that, going through, double checking, triple checking the grammar before you submit. That's one of the admissions tutors' kind of most common complaints from personal statements that they've rejected is the idea of incorrect grammar or incorrect spelling repetitively through the personal statement. It also isn't a test like your normal school exams, so you can send it to family members, teachers, you can send it to an OMS mentor if you have one, you can submit it to Insight Outreach and get someone to help you with that grammar. It's not a spot test, it's something that other people can help you with, so do take advantage of that. Someone says, I'm just wondering how personal you can make it, because I write fiction stories, so I feel like my personal statement will be kind of full of emotions. Is that a bad thing? Definitely not. This personal statement is your opportunity to get down your voice on paper. It's, well, if I'm being a bit bleak, it's the first opportunity and the last opportunity you'll have in a while purely to talk about yourself. So emotions are not a bad thing. They want to see your opinions. They want to see how you engage and interact with the material. Definitely not a bad thing at all to include it. It would be a bad thing if you didn't include it, I would say there. Okay, so yeah, definitely include those emotions and a range of perspectives and how you're reacting to the material. That personal voice should shine through. Think of that personal statement like an interview on paper, essentially. I've got a couple of things that I do like here and a couple of things I don't like here when kind of thinking about the grammatical side of personal statements. For those in the room or on YouTube, does anyone want to take one of these, either one of the good things or one of the bad things? Any thoughts on what I've got here? Okay, I'm going to start us off with this semicolon. I think it's a piece of grammar that not many people use in a personal statement that can actually really help you out and is your friend. I think most grammar, we think of full stops, commas, and the semicolon kind of gets left. And it is a really good in-between between a full stop and a comma. So if you've got loads of sentences in a row and you're struggling to avoid starting that next sentence with I or the, that third or fourth time, a semicolon is something that can have a bigger break than a comma, but continues so that you have kind of a continuation of the old idea in a slightly new way in a new sentence. So it can be a really useful piece of punctuation. Fantastic. Olivia B, exactly. So not many people know how to use the semicolon. So using it correctly helps it to stand out and also helps you to kind of find that balance between how you can kind of construct and make that flow of your sentences work better together. It's exactly the same with this second one. It looks a bit like an underscore, but it's actually an EM dash. So it's kind of the long dash. Does anyone know kind of, yeah, I mean, I guess on the EM dash, what I would say there is it can be a really good catch-all piece of grammar. So if you're not sure whether it should be a comma, a semicolon, something else, the dash is pretty much a get out of jail free card if you want to use it once or twice in your personal statement. It's a really flexible bit of grammar that can help you. Obviously, don't put it in every sentence. It will look really weird. You're not Sylvia Plath, or if you don't know who Sylvia Plath is, that's okay. You don't need to, but you might want to have a Google of her poetry afterwards. But yeah, that EM dash is a really good way of being able to get yourself out of jail free just once or twice through the personal statement if you're not sure what grammar to use. Then we've got these inverted commas. You might have been told about putting in inverted commas around books if you're doing formal studies. So you usually either have italics or inverted commas. If you're describing a book that you've read, you'd use italics. If you're describing a short article, you've usually got inverted commas. UCAS is a bit old-fashioned and a bit of a faff when you actually put your personal statement into it. So what it will do is it will remove all the formatting like italics so they won't show up, which means that you never need to worry about putting in italics as you're drafting it on Microsoft Word, because they just won't be there in the final thing. And the same with inverted commas. You might think it's necessary to kind of put inverted commas around the text, the pieces of work you're studying. On the personal statement, this is the only time, and you're not allowed to quote it to your English teachers because I'm only talking about the personal statement. This is the only time where you can just leave off all that stuff for grammar. Every time you put in those inverted commas, it will take up 2 extra characters. And if you're quoting kind of 10, 15 different kind of things, that's going to add up to your character count quite dramatically. You don't need to quote anywhere near that many. I'm just kind of giving an example for it. So yeah, getting rid of those inverted commas could be a great way to save characters so you can use them for something more meaningful. And UCAS and the admissions tutors don't mind it at all. They're used to seeing UCAS destroy the formatting in a very ugly way that doesn't happen on Microsoft Word. So just save yourself characters, save yourself the hassle of looking up italics versus inverted commas, and just leave them out altogether. A question from the YouTube chat. If your personal statement is in constant flux because of projects you're doing over the summer, how should we go around doing the first draft? It's a good question. My advice there would be to start by breaking it up really clearly into those 6 paragraphs. So thinking what goes into each individual paragraph, and focusing on the most pertinent, the most relevant topics that stand out to you according to those paragraph structures. You're not probably going to be able to include everything. So being able to list those things down allow you to work out the best ideas that you have. Because if you've listed all the things you're doing, and there's kind of 150% of the content that will make up the top part of the personal statement, you'll end up cutting out the worst 50% of that. So you're left with the strongest 100. So that's what I would say. Get all those ideas down that you've been thinking about, even if they're newer or kind of in development, and then cut out the ones that are the weakest or the ones that you don't think you can link at all to any other part of the personal statement that are a bit isolated. And that will just leave you with the strongest 100% at the end. Hopefully that's a good way to help get that first draft together. If it's not, just drop me another message and we can go into a bit more detail on that. Which paragraph should have the most characters? Really good question, Olivia. I would say the first paragraph should be quite short, so not too many characters. I would focus on a single individual trigger kind of passion event and then leave it at that. The second and the third paragraph will be a bit chunkier. So the second one on your A levels and how you're standing out from other students doing those same A levels, that can be quite a chunky paragraph. Exactly the same with the third one. Your favorite topics, I'm saying topics in the plural because I would look to have 2 or 3 most likely. And there again, you can afford to go into quite a bit of detail on them. So that would be a chunkier paragraph. If you're applying for a vocational degree, you've got some good work experience. That fourth one will be one of the bigger ones as well. If you don't have as much work experience, that's okay. Divide up that extra space amongst the first 3 paragraphs and add a couple more characters there. The ones that I would say should be short are that 5th paragraph on extracurriculars and certainly the 6th paragraph as well. Both of those should be quite a short, concise paragraph with less characters. Hopefully that helps. If it doesn't, feel free to come back to me. Next question, why have I got Mrs. Claus, Father Christmas and Rudolph in a PowerPoint in July? Any ideas here at all? What on earth are they doing here? Or am I just really optimistic for Christmas? Any thoughts? Feel free to unmute if you're in the room, write them on the chat as well. It all links to grammar again. Yes, Olivia, fantastic. Someone close to my heart in getting the puns. Yeah, we're all about the clauses here. Okay, so I've put 3 clauses up. I mean, I don't know whether Rudolph kind of counts as a member of the family, but we're going to say he does. But I've put the 3 clauses up because I think that's the maximum amount of clauses you should be aiming for in any one sentence of your personal statement. You should be able to kind of read it out loud and be able to get through from the start to finish that sentence without running out of breath or getting lost or confused halfway through. And I think 3 different sub-clauses is about the maximum there. Of course, if you want to do a 4th, just fight me. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's not kind of go through. But what I'm really saying to avoid is loads of long, really passive, winding sentences right the way through that personal statement. The admissions tutor wants an easy job reading it, make their life easy for them. It will help you in the long run, certainly. As soon as we try and get kind of 5, 6 clauses, you've got Donna and Blitzen trying to get on the action, clashing into each other, getting confused. You just lose the meaning of the sentence. And I'm there thinking, I don't know where it starts. I don't know where it stops. I've just given up reading it. Okay, so keep it simple, keep it nice and short on those clauses would be my advice. Maria says, what do you mean by standing out in our A-level subjects? Great question. So that second paragraph structure that we recommend is talking about what your A-level subjects have done for you, what kind of skills you've worked on in those subjects, and some of the content maybe you've covered. But if you're doing one of the more popular A-level courses, so let's say we're talking about a particular topic in English literature, there'll have been loads of people that have done that same book of that same topic. So what we want to see is you going that a little bit further beyond what other people have done. So maybe you were really intrigued by this individual part of the topic. So you went away and watched a 1-hour online lecture on it, or you watched a related YouTube video on it, or you read an article on it, something like that, that just shows you've done something slightly different with that knowledge compared to just completing your homework in school, getting the base level you need to pass and then moving on. That's the kind of thing that will help you to stand out when comparing A-level subjects against someone else who's done the same thing. Hopefully that answers your question, Maria. Again, if not, fire it back at me. Next slide. Okay, and this is on the do's and don'ts all the way through the personal statement. I'm going to focus in on some of these in a bit more detail and ask you guys some questions on them. In a particularly negative mood, I'm going to start with the don'ts, actually. So don't just describe. Would anyone in the room feeling bold like to unmute and talk to me about why that's bad or why we shouldn't just describe? So Vega, fantastic, because it's not personal, okay? Yeah, so I think that it always falls into that and again, I mentioned it a bit earlier with the work experience, but it can always fall into that habit of just talking about what the plot of something is, what the topic was in a maths, physics kind of sense, what you learned from that sort of thing. And it becomes quite bland, quite stale to read. What we really want is the analysis skills that are shown through there. So rather than just describing, back up that statement. If you're doing an arts, humanities subject, that can mean opinions. If you're doing maths subjects, give that extra specific example or facts or something you use to implement that skill in the real world would be a great way that you can take it further as well. Slang, cliches, quotations, these are definitely pet hates of mine. There should definitely be no slang at all. Cliches just sound really false and forced. I would avoid them if you really can. And quotes, you've got 4,000 characters to summarize your entire life so far. Okay, so using someone else's words is just a waste of that space. You've got 4,000 characters for your whole life and you're using someone else's words. I would stick well clear of it, basically. The next one, I've got this phrase, over sophisticated waffle, which is basically where we start going through all these technical terms that we think showing off, kind of making us sound good. I would just say, there's always a place for a technical term and you shouldn't kind of worry about trying to avoid them. But at the same time, don't just put in a technical term for the sake of thinking it sounds good. Only use terminology if you really need or want to use it for that case, okay? It will be awful for you if you get it in the wrong place or kind of don't use it correctly to start with. And it doesn't usually add too much to a personal statement unless you really are interested in that terminology. They're not looking for kind of people who are know-it-all or who are already Isaac Newton in development. They're looking for people who are intellectually curious, prepared to throw themselves into all the challenges of the university experience. So you don't need a whole range of terminology yet in order to do that. What about we? Why not use we? Any thoughts there? What's wrong with we? Why don't I like we? Gabby, what do you think? If you're happy to kind of share, what about we?
Well, you're only talking about yourself, so there's no need for it.
Yeah, and I think my main focus here is we is plural. Okay, this is one of the only chances you get to brag about yourself, basically, and what you've done. Don't give the credit to someone else. You take the credit for it this time as well. So yeah, I would avoid we, even if that means that you're exaggerating kind of something you did as part of a team. Emphasize your role within that team rather than talking about what we did. Okay, they want to see what's specific to you because it's only you that they're looking to make that offer to. This next one, okay, lie about anything and I mean, none of you guys we know are kind of liars anyway. So I mean, I kind of phrase that more and kind of pretend you've done something. So you might have the best intention in the world over the summer to be reading this and that or doing this and that, and then it doesn't end up materializing. Please avoid doing that in the personal statement, especially for you guys going for Oxbridge, where they can choose to ask questions on the personal statement at interview. There's nothing worse than thinking you were going to do that thing in the summer, it becoming the first question in the interview. The interviewer thinks there's being really nice, ask you a nice, easy question at the start on something that you've already done, talked lots about, and that interview starts with you going, I never actually got around to doing that. It's a really difficult way to start it. So what I would say is, please don't pretend to do something. It's going to be really difficult to analyze rather than just describe it if you haven't finished that activity that you're going to put in. You don't have to leave it out entirely. So going back to what I said a bit earlier about showing it's not a work frozen in time, if you are planning on doing something this summer and you haven't done it yet, you can put it in and say that you're planning to do it in the future. That's absolutely fine. It's showing that intellectual curiosity. And it can also be a discussion point at interview. They might say, oh, you said you're going to do this. What did you learn from that? And then you do have something you can talk about there at interview as well. But just be very careful of putting in stuff that you haven't actually finished or completed. Career plans, there is that difference as well between career, university. The personal statement is for university. So if you're doing a vocational subject, career plans, things like that, they can be relevant, but overwhelmingly, I would stick to thinking about your studies, academia, rather than thinking about careers in the future. Lists, we've talked about plenty already, and the same as long, winding, passive sentences. So I did this rather than it could be deduced that, okay? Your teachers might have got you quite used to writing in that passive way to show objectivity for essays. And the personal statement is a bit clunky. There are kind of questions on this at the end. It sounds really weird talking about yourself, but you have just got to launch in with the active voice. Avoid that passive because it will make it sound even clunkier and a bit more weird. Just be direct and assertive with taking command and using those words. I is always going to feature in your personal statement, but my one pet peeve, you're not going to be instantly rejected from universities for this and so on, but the most common word to start a personal statement with in the country is I. So if I read I as the first word, I've probably begun slightly switching off. That's more of a reflection on me than on you guys, and it could be a great personal statement. It's not going to be the end of the world, but capture our interest with that first sentence. If your admissions tutor is on their 150th personal statement of the day, another I did this, I did that, I came out of the womb knowing I wanted to be a lawyer and studying contracts, it's not going to stand out to them. It's not going to sound realistic. Jump in with something interesting, a word that captures their attention right from the off. We've put together some compendiums of personal statements that you can have a look at of successful past entries. We'll go through some more of them as well, but capture someone's interest with that first word. Some of my favorites in recent times, there's a geography one that started with the volcano that erupted in Iceland a while ago as an opening point. There's ones that jump in with technical terms or a personal situation that they've been talking about as well. Those, I think, are better ways to start rather than that first word being an I, which I would try and avoid. I'm going to have a quick pause now to take some questions that are coming in via the chat. So what are your thoughts on writing 2 personal statements? I'm going for a rather niche course at Oxford and another not entirely unrelated course at other universities, but I'm struggling to mention. So you can't actually write 2 separate personal statements. One of the things about the UK university system is it's one personal statement that applies to up to all 5 of your choices. So you can apply to up to 5 universities and you must send the same personal statement to each one. In some cases, you might not be studying the same courses at different universities. That's okay, and the admissions tutors are prepared for that and understand that, especially at somewhere like Oxford and Cambridge, where there are some pretty niche courses, some pretty unusual courses. They're aware of the fact that you might be doing a slightly different course at other universities. My advice would always be is pick the common themes, the things that are relevant to all 5 of your universities or as many of those 5 as possible, and emphasize them a bit more. Of course, the same goes in the other direction. So if there is something niche, but you are really interested in, so say if you're doing maths at 4 universities, but want to apply for maths and philosophy at Oxford, do mention the philosophy, put it in as one of the topics of interest in that 3rd paragraph, or kind of that you've been to some lectures on it in the 4th paragraph. That's absolutely fine. It's not going to disadvantage you at all for any of the maths universities, and it will show a bit of interest for the maths and philosophy course as well. So it's just about that balance. You're writing one personal statement with the majority of the emphasis on the common themes through the subjects, but you can have a little bit of room for anything else there. Hopefully that helps, Emily. Florence says, for someone applying for English, would the 3rd paragraph be focused on books? Short answer is yes. I think that would be a great thing to focus it on. I would be encouraged to explore a little bit. So certainly books should be a large focus. I might have a think about some of the literature surrounding that. So the analysis literature rather than just the books themselves, like fiction, non-fiction. That could be one area you go as well. And maybe the third paragraph or maybe the fourth paragraph, I might link some plays in as well. So if theatre is a particular hobby, I don't know whether it is, you might kind of have gone to seen a play and you can compare how the character was in the book and how you thought of them versus how they were portrayed in a play. That can be another really good way of differentiating out, standing out from just having that list-like structure of books, some way to avoid that. What should we do if we haven't been able to get work experience due to restrictions? That's no worries at all, Kai. It's certainly what a crazy kind of past, well, it's been far too long now that we've been living with COVID times. If you haven't managed to get work experience, that's absolutely okay. I would focus on other extracurriculars. So it could be that you really like doing kind of problems in your own time on something like HE+. If you haven't come across HE+ yet, it's a great free online resource developed by the lecturers at Cambridge that gives you past questions for lots of subjects. Oxplore has other things on it as well, which kind of big think questions as well. Those could be areas that you go to, looking at some online resources rather than in-person work experience. So it's just about tailoring to show that you're doing some kind of subject-related thing in your free time. What they're really looking for is someone at school, your kind of teachers are there to make sure you submit your homework on time and so on. At university, you basically get left a lot more to yourself to worry about things like that. So what they want to know is that you enjoy doing your subject in your free time and are going to spend some time doing that rather than just sitting there binging Netflix in your room all day, basically. So it's just about showing them, giving them those signs that you're doing some other stuff related to your subject in your free time rather than just in the main work hours of the day. Where can I find the personal statement examples? They should be on the portals. If you still can't find them, let me know and I can email some of them across. All of the personal statement archives we have, they are taken from successful past entries to Oxford and Cambridge. So all of the archives there have met with success in getting through that personal statement stage of Oxford and Cambridge admissions. So some good examples to have a look at and to be inspired by. Do bear in mind that everything's run through a plagiarism checker against previous years. So if you do really like an idea, you are going to need to find your own way of phrasing it rather than just copying it, because otherwise that could end in a bit of a disaster with the plagiarism software. Yeah, Emily, it's definitely one personal statement. I'm glad that helped. Is it a disadvantage if only prose is mentioned for English? This is specific to English, this question, but I'm going to broaden it out slightly as well. So no, it's not completely a disadvantage if only prose is mentioned, but there's always this balance between depth and breadth in the personal statement. And if you really like prose, that should feature a lot and it should convey the fact that you like prose, but not 100%, I would say. Try and have some bit of variation in there, whether that be poetry, whether that be breaking down prose into fiction, non-fiction, however it might be. I would try and get a little bit of variation in there. There should always be some breadth to the personal statement. If you're really unsure on the depth versus breadth, because unhelpfully most admissions tutors tell you both, my personal opinion is I would go for depth over breadth. So if you're looking at something like the third paragraph where you're talking about your favorite topics, I've already said, and I'll say it again, I would much rather 2 to 3 topics in detail with proper analysis about them, rather than 5 things that you can only mention for 1 sentence each, just for the sake of showing breadth. I would always go into depth because those analysis skills are the harder ones to show and the things that will stand you out more than just the range of experiences. They care about how you reflect and how you analyze a little bit more than the wide range, as long as there is some range there. Well, that's at least my opinion on it. How would you catch yourself describing the course and avoid it? This is a really good question, and I think I'm going to come on to this a bit in anything where you realize you're summarizing plot or summarizing what kind of topics are being taken without any personal comment on them. That's where I would say you're going into description rather than analysis. So if I go on to my next slide here, these 2 questions at the bottom, I think, are the questions that I would ask yourself every single sentence to see if you're describing or analyzing. Every sentence, and I can't emphasize this enough, every individual sentence of the personal statement should answer one of these two questions for me. How does this show I want to study my subject? Or why does this make me a good candidate for my subject? If any sentence in the personal statement doesn't answer one of those two questions, for me, I would cut it or I would rephrase it and I would rework it until it does. It goes back to that 4,000 characters to summarize your entire academic journey so far. We need to be concise and precise with what details you include. And anything that doesn't answer this, I would say, is more verging on description. So hopefully that helps as a way that you can kind of go through it. And it might be quite difficult at the start. Certainly you can look through it at the start and go, oh my word, there's loads of sentences where I haven't quite done that. That's okay. You've still got time and you've done the hard part. You've got the ideas down on paper. Then it's about redrafting, rephrasing. That can be a really long part of the process and it can be a bit tedious sometimes as well, but it's a really important part after that first draft. So don't worry if it's taking a while. Don't worry if it's difficult. That is a very common experience and it's nothing to be ashamed or afraid of. It's something that the best personal statements at the end of the day will think about and will have had reflected. Then there's kind of that final check as well. So I've got three things down here that I think Claire mentioned last time to you as well, which is motivational factor, likability factor, and X factor. More generally, if you think you're getting quite close to finishing, I would read through and check that. Does it show I'm motivated? Does it make me likable? So as we say, it's kind of a modest brag is kind of what the personal statement is. You're trying to really convey those achievements really concretely, but at the same time, not kind of sound too pretentious with it, with the words, the technical terms, the descriptions you're using. So a bit of that likability, and then the X factor, something a bit different, something that stands you out and shows you're unique. So I would reread it and then again check as much as possible that every single paragraph has something a bit like that in, or as many of the paragraphs as possible have one of those features in it to let you know that you're getting close to being done. Then in terms of sending it on to people, again, you're not isolated or alone for this personal statement. Do send it to your friends, tutors, teachers, family, whoever, me, whoever you like to. Do send on your personal statement to others to have it reflected and marked, but be realistic with it as well. So if you send your personal statement to 9 people at once, the most likely option is you're going to get 9 pieces of different feedback and it's going to be really difficult to work on. All feedback is good feedback, but none of us can process that much of it at once. So I would probably send it on to 3 people at once. If it was me, I would send it to a friend, a family member, and a teacher. That should be available to everyone. If you do have a mentor, you can send it on to them as well, obviously, and they'll help with it. But I would send it on to a friend, family member, and teacher. And they'll all be looking for slightly different things. For me, going to your parents, it's always where you can go for an honest opinion. They'll be able to tell you whether it sounds like you, whether it conveys your voice, and that's a really useful thing. If you send it to a friend, then they've got that same experience of going through education as you. They know what you're like in the classroom. They'll have some understanding of the content as well. They might have some thoughts about what you should or shouldn't include. Great person to send it to. And then your teacher or a tutor, a mentor, someone like that can go through with the critical eye, can look at the analysis that you've completed on the books, tell you whether they think it's right, wrong, whether there's any changes you should make to it there. So then if you're sending it to 3 people at once, you're getting slightly different feedback from each person. It's easier to process that, to put it all together and to turn it into the final copy as well. So some more thoughts there on kind of how to help on that redrafting process. And again, I can't emphasize enough, it will take a little bit of time and we will be there to kind of help with it and reflect on that as well. I hope that's begun to answer some of the questions. If you have more questions, please do send them through. I'm kind of staying online for a little bit to answer some of them. So if you have questions about your specific personal statement, about them in general, do put them in. If you would prefer that I go through some personal statements that have already been submitted to me and we talk about them, I'm happy to do that as well. Whatever you prefer, just type it in the chat or shout out at me and we can do that. Can we have a look at some successful ones, says Olivia? Yeah, go on, let's go there. I have got one for law, archaeology and anthropology, medicine, engineering, or history. Where do we want to go? First one gets it. Law, arc, yeah, I'll get some examples up on the share screen now, Maria. Which one? Where do we want to go? Any preferences amongst them? If not, I'm happy to pick randomly, but I want to make it as useful as possible for you guys who are here. So I've got one up on law. I've got one archaeology and anthropology, one on medicine, one on engineering, and one on history ready to go. Engineering, fantastic. Let's go there. Here we go, and I'll give everyone a couple of moments to read this. And in fact, I'm going to be bold. Jafar, can you read the first paragraph of this for me, please?
Yeah, sure. From developing modifications for mobile applications using Java to improve a game's capabilities, first initiated a keen interest in engineering during primary school. Since then, I've taken a proactive approach to problem solving.
What do we think of this first sentence or first paragraph, 2 sentences? Any thoughts? Yeah, go on, Jafar.
I think it's quite good. It says kind of what inspired them and how they came to be interested in engineering.
Yeah, I think so as well. Short, sharp, right? It gets us in, it doesn't hang about, it tells us exactly what we need and want to know. So a fun start. And anything that you would do differently, or anyone here would improve about this first paragraph? Because there are things that we could certainly still improve. It might have been successful, but there's always things we can change. I can see history is popular in the chat. I'll come to history next. For me, I would go for a little bit more analysis here. I just want one sentence more of analysis in this. So from developing modifications for mobile phone applications using Java to improve a game's capabilities, it's really hinting at something great, fantastic that they've done. And I just want that level of detail. What did they do? They've improved what game's capabilities? How did they use Java for that? Those extra couple of words will just get that slight bit more detail that really unlocks that idea further. And I would much rather they did that and cut down on something else ever so slightly to kind of take this paragraph to the next level, especially because it's at primary school. Being able to code that young and kind of have started that interest there, I think would be great. What you can then see is this student started with 6 paragraphs and ended up combining it down to 5. So that 4th paragraph was kind of a combination of the 4th and 5th because they didn't have many extracurricular activities to include, which is, I believe, something, Jafar, that you kind of had as a question as well. So that's quite a good way around it. And here we go, exactly what I mean on kind of going beyond the curriculum. So starting with an HE Plus lesson on regression analysis, and then they go away and explore that. So they took a class, they took a lesson, and then they went away and went beyond that to explore the topic in more detail. Therefore, as well, is another great word in here that adds one of that linking words, that bit of flow that connects sentences together. Rather than just, I tested my knowledge, that therefore implies it comes from having researched this topic in more detail. So that's another way that I think this personal statement stands out in a good way. And again, we've got online lessons, research in their own time, coding, and a book all mentioned within the first kind of 3-4 sentences of this paragraph. So it's giving us a huge range of different ideas here of how they're going beyond that curriculum, which I think is really effective for this personal statement. Does someone want to read out the third paragraph. Can I ask was it Olivia B? Could I ask you to read out the third paragraph? Nevertheless.
Yeah, sure. Nevertheless, I realise exceptional problem-solving skills are essential to study engineering. After attending a physics masterclass in Cambridge, I used the Isaac Physics website to tackle complex problems with no solution bank to fall back on. It encouraged me to delve deeper into the context of a problem. From all this practice, I received the top award in the Cambridge Senior Physics Challenge that included an invite to attend the SPB bootcamp, throughout which we solved problems in the book, A Cavendish Quantum Mechanics Primer. This allowed me to develop a quantitative understanding of principles in quantum mechanics by calculating the deep and mysterious effects for myself using the time-independent Schrödinger,
Perfect. Schrödinger, yeah.
Equation and the uncertainty principle. As a result, the course illustrated how such effects are revolutionizing multiple fields of engineering. In particular, the ability to describe how particles explore regions that are classically forbidden are being utilized by scanning tunneling microscopes and allowing scientists to take a glimpse at the atomic world.
Really well read, Olivia. What do you think of that?
It's very impressive. I mean, I take physics at A level, so they just love physics, I can tell. And it's very impressive with what they were awarded. But they talked about what they were awarded, but they also explained what they learnt from it as well. So it's almost proving that they did deserve it.
Yeah, you're so right, Olivia, here. And what jumps out to me is you can just tell they like physics. It's as simple as that. And this is actually, well, this is the 7th draft to show that they really like physics. So it doesn't happen in a day, and that's okay. But it just does jump out at you. And they've used quite a clever technique here, which is something called CAR, which stands for context, action, result. So at the start of that paragraph, they've given some context on a physics masterclass. They've then gone away and done an action, Isaac Physics, and described and not described, and analyzed rather than described that by talking about no solution bank, delving deeper. And then the result, they received top award in Cambridge Physics Challenge. Okay, it doesn't matter if you don't have the best result in the world. It doesn't matter if you haven't won a competition. That's okay. The main thing is that you have some kind of learning outcome from it. If you do have an award, great, put it in. If you don't, it doesn't matter. But that context, action, result, all with a bit of analysis at each stage, is a really good way to explore that independent topic, and is what this student has used here. They have got lots of technical terms in there, but only where they're relevant, only where they really actually like that topic. And again, it just goes to reinforce how much they like physics. So a really good example here, I think, on the third paragraph of how you can talk about your favorite topics and show that interest in the subject. I'm aware we're running pretty late on time, and at the same time, I was asked if we could do some history. So I'm just going to go to the history one and talk about maybe, let's go with the opening paragraph of this history one. Could I ask one volunteer in the room who wants to read the opening paragraph of this history one? Olivia P, are you happy to read the opening paragraph here?
Yeah, that's fine. Nationalism drives history. I grew up listening to stories of my great-grandfather, an Indian nationalist freedom fighter. This inspired me to explore the history of the empire, as I was exposed to both the romanticized view of it in Britain and the discrimination and struggles faced in India. I learned about the discrimination he faced, but also the fervent nationalism in opposition. These ideas are ever present and have been throughout history. By exploring ancient civilizations as well, I became intrigued by both the similarities and differences with modern history with uncanny resonance. My thirst for history is modelled on its value, the process of challenging and reclaiming ideas from the past in order to forge new cultures, identities, and prejudices.
Fantastic. Really well read as well, Olivia. What do you think of this one?
I thought it was really good because it was like personal, like they had their own trigger point for it. And then they used that to kind of like expand on why they love the subject so much. Yeah,
absolutely. It's got that. This is that personal inception point. The stories from the great grandfather is fantastic and shows that start of the passion for history. If I'm being critical of this as well as we can do on kind of things I would think about or consider, they've got a really interesting first word or first sentence here, but it's not. The second sentence is the one that's relevant to them rather than the first. So if it was me, going back to what I was saying about before, about every single sentence answering one of those two questions, I would rephrase this, cut both sentences so that they fit together, and start with that right at the start, with that idea of listening to the stories from the great grandfather, rather than this phrase, nationalism drives history. That's quite a complex phrase that you could break down and write a book on. And I it's an intriguing one to start with, but it's one that I'd probably avoid and just zoom in with that personal detail first. If I'm being really fussy as well, and this is the kind of level of detail I think you can go into, I've got discrimination here and discrimination here that I've spotted twice in a row in a sentence. I would rephrase one of them or try and rework it so it's slightly less repetitive as well and use those characters elsewhere. I would try and avoid any repetition to sentences in a row if you can. My last point for this one as well, with an uncanny resonance. I'll be quite honest, I'm not sure how that fits or what it means here. I would just cut the words. I think it's in there because uncanny is a cool word and resonance is a cool word. I don't think it adds much to the meaning. And that's kind of ever so slightly drifting. It's a really good personal statement, but that one for me, those 4 words ever so slightly drift towards that over sophisticated waffle we talked about a bit earlier. So a really good paragraph here, but still always room for kind of some tweaks and exploration. And that's the kind of gaze and eye I want you to go through with and think about here on kind of how they've worked and also how things can still be improved. The other thing I just want to point out as well at the bottom of this one is as well. So if we have a quick look at a final paragraph, really short, really sharp. I'm excited to learn more about the unresolved puzzle of history through studying both ancient and modern history as an undergraduate, finding parallels and resonance. I hope I can use my degree to consider new perspectives and shape my own as a result. So a short rounding off paragraph that summarizes and ties everything together. My favorite actually for something like this is a law example at the top. So the personal statement starts with traveling to her dad's house on a Thursday evening. And then the final paragraph finishes by talking about how debating with her father would become a lot more interesting. That kind of thing is something called ring composition as well, where you start with an idea and finish with an idea, and it can show a really clever crafting or kind of structure to that 6th paragraph if you want to use something like that to help the personal statement stand out a bit more. So a couple of ideas to consider there as well for the redraft process as you go through. I'm aware we are well past the hour mark now, so I should probably begin to wrap it up soon. But if you have any questions, you can keep them coming in via the YouTube chat. If you do want to leave now, you're welcome to, and I wish you a really nice summer and best of luck with the redrafting part of it as well. So if you have any questions, do let me know as you go through and continue using those FAQs, but really good luck with the redrafting. One thing just to say is on the 2nd of August, so the 2nd of August next week coming up, there will be an option to submit your personal statement via the portal so that it can be reviewed and checked by one of our mentors. So a good opportunity there if you haven't had your personal statement reviewed, and that goes for self-studiers primarily. Then if you don't have a mentor, you can also submit it and have it reviewed there. If you have a mentor, I would recommend going through your mentor because it will be the most specific and they'll know you the best. but submitting them on that 2nd of August when a link goes up will be a great way that you can have some feedback on your personal statement from the team here. I'll finish it there, wishing you all a lovely summer and all the best, guys. And Olivia, yes, feel free. A pleasure, Sylvega and Jafar. Olivia, yes, absolutely. Feel free to drop me a message. I'll send you an email with my email and we can have a look at that for sure. Okay. Maria, one last question before we go on, I'll answer that. Advice for someone writing a personal statement for joint honours. What are your joint honours? Go on really quickly, and we can cover that one. Yeah, I'll repost the personal statement examples, okay. Okay, really brief one for joint honours. The way I would recommend it is I would divide it slightly between the two. So in your second paragraph, let's pick MML as an example. Okay, so where you're doing 2 different languages. In that second paragraph, I would focus on one language, try and find a point of overlap. So maybe you're discussing 2 books, find some kind of point of overlap, a characterization, and discuss one from the Italian language perspective and one from the Spanish language perspective. That can be a good way of approaching the joint honours. So within each paragraph, all of the joint honours degrees will kind of require you to interact and engage with different parts of the course together in one section. So what I would avoid doing basically is having a paragraph on Italian, a paragraph on German, try and integrate. You're doing modern language, you're doing languages. This will work quite well together. So I would try and have them so that they interweave. So with English and French, you could look at literature and characterization of a play that's both in English and French and some translation to do with that. Or you could find something that kind of overlaps, stems from the two, and directly compare and contrast. It's that compare and contrast that's the really essential skill for the joint honours degree. I hope that helps, and certainly I speak from experience there in trying to have to compare and contrast 2 languages for when I was writing mine as well. And what I would say is just carry on going back and kind of thinking about those links and what you can bring together for them. Fantastic. Have a lovely rest of your evening, guys, and I'll see you